Hey everybody, it's Matt from Hidden Machine here to talk about the 63 demos that I played during the most recent Steam Next Fest. Now, the Next Fest ended about 11 days ago, but most of these games aren't even out yet. The demos are still up for the majority of these games, so you might think, Next Fest coverage? I mean, come on, dude, it's been 11 days. Well, it's still relevant. You can learn a lot. Now, I wanted to get this video out sooner, but life got in the way, so I'm kind of just going to go as quick as I can through these things. I treat the Steam Next Fest like a sort of buffet, and I'm going, it's all you can eat. I'm taking a little bite of this, a little bite of that, go back to my table, get my fill. I go, hold on, let me clear some space, and then go up for another round. And so I'm not giving these demos, hours upon hours upon hours of my time. I'm kind of just dipping into these games, checking them out, and giving my first impressions. So don't live or die by my suggestions here. It's just what I thought. And to kind of categorize things, I broke it down into 4 different categories, being I didn't like it, but you might. I like it, but maybe it needs some work. I liked it, no notes, and I loved it. So we'll start with the I didn't like it, but you might category and go from there. Of course, just thanks to everyone on Patreon who supports the channel and lets us do silly things like this from time to time. It's with your permission that I'm making this video, and if you support us, then you are fully endorsing all of these statements and adopting them as your own word, and that is 100% legally binding. Anyway, let's go to the first game. It's Pineapple, A Bittersweet Revenge. It's an adventure game that seems to use a variety of mechanics, but it froze up for me right after this first scenario. The level that I could play was a pretty awkward stealth mission where I kept getting seen by enemies but had no way of avoiding detection due to where they were placed. This was really frustrating, and I was actually just overthinking it. I just had to move faster and not act like I could see the enemy there at the bottom of the screen, I guess. Pass. Next up, we have Slider. It's one of those games that I feel too stupid to be able to enjoy, to be honest. You manipulate the world around you using one of those slide puzzles. Honestly, every time I've had to do this in Resident Evil 4, I looked up a walkthrough. I cannot do slide puzzles. I remember getting them as a child and just being very frustrated and confused. This game was too confusing for me, but it does really seem like a cool idea. I think someone's gonna love this. G.I. Joe Wrath of Cobra is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that features gameplay that I would have considered to be kind of bland, even as far back as 30 years ago. Well, there have been a bunch of games that have been able to iterate on the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre and make it feel fresh. This demo has me feeling like the game is being rushed and will likely not connect with any significant audience. I gotta say, whenever I see a horror franchise get picked up for a game, it's an asymmetrical multiplayer game. I'm sick of those, and whenever I see a cool, cartoon franchise from the 80s or 90s get picked up for a game, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and I gotta say I'm kind of sick of those too. It can be done well, but it's trying to do something nostalgic, I think, and it just doesn't really work. We could do better. G.I. Joe could have been a run and gun, and it could have been a lot more action-oriented, and I don't know. I'm gonna move on, but not liking what I've played so far. The Night Slashers remake actually left me feeling like this was even more rushed than the G.I. Joe game. It's a remake of a 31-year-old game and somehow manages to look worse than the game that came out 30 years ago. It feels worse, it sounds worse, and I don't know. In my opinion, this game is super stiff, the graphics are very uninspired, and the overall polish and presentation was just nowhere to be found, in my opinion. Pyramid Runner feels like the result of a Game Maker tutorial. It's generic, but it is a lot of fun, mostly because it's built on a foundation that was already laid out by many other games that have come before it. So it's, it works, but it's not original. And also the resolution was super weird for me, and I couldn't get it to actually run in full screen, as you can see here in my footage. Lethal Honor is a third-person action roguelite with a comic book presentation. There's a lot of charming stuff here, but the gameplay doesn't really do anything to separate itself from so many other games that I've played in this style. I have a similar criticism of Odinfall, which plays nearly identical to Nuclear Throne. I didn't care for Nuclear Throne, and I didn't really care for this, but if you're a fan of the genre, you might like Odinfall. Bonefield is another entry into the emerging body cam style game. This is a bit of a walking simulator type horror adventure demo. There's jump scares, a creepy house, and some surprises to find. Personally, I found the presentation to be very interesting, but also kind of difficult to look at, and I feel like it gave me slight nausea. It also seemed to be cooking my PC, even on medium settings. I have a feeling that a lot of games are going to go for this style before one, really nails it. Kitsune Tails, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a platformer that seems to take a lot of influence from the 8-bit Super Mario Bros. Games. In my experience, it's a little bit too slow-paced to really tap into the same type of fun I get from the Mario series. But the game is also much more story-oriented than most 8-bit platformers from, back in the day. I think some people will love this one, but it's just not for me. Hate Me Not is a roguelite twin-stick shooter that has you jumping back and forth between light and dark sides of the screen. On the dark side, you attack enemies. On the light side, you collect energy that powers your attacks, kind of like, Ikaruga or something. But you'll also have to dodge attacks while collecting that energy. The concept is pretty cool, but the game was way too difficult for me, and the attacks are mapped to the shoulder buttons. Personally, I can't stand when a game makes me slam the shoulder buttons constantly. To me, it makes more sense to map firing to the triggers, but either way, it seems like I'm just not cut out for this game. Linkito, or Linkito? It's a puzzle game, and it has you connecting circuits, among other activities. This is pretty cool, and it seems to have a much more deep story than you might expect from a puzzle game. But I hit a wall pretty early on in this demo. I am just not good at this sort of puzzle, but I think other people will love this one. 500 caliber CONTRACTZ describes itself as a 3D platformer where you kill rich people with a big sniper rifle. It's got a lot of style, and I think a lot of people already love this one. But honestly, the game felt way too esoteric to me. I had no idea what was going on, and I didn't feel motivated enough to, think really hard and figure it out. That's on me, though. I think this one will probably be a hit. POGOPPL is a game where you traverse different courses using a pogo stick. This seems like it has a lot of cool ideas, but I was really just not clicking with it. The most difficult part for me was timing the pogo bounces, which is kind of the whole point of the game. There's an arrow around your character which indicates the direction you're leaning. To bounce, you hold the A button down and then release it at the last possible moment. However, because this arrow extends a bit beyond the boundaries of your character's sprite and their stick, I was constantly confusing the tip of the arrow for the bottom of the pogo stick. I don't think I'm the only one who had this problem. Let me know. I feel like this is kind of a crazy design choice, and I didn't get it at all. Next up, Amanda the Adventurer 2. I think that maybe I'm just a big moron, but I couldn't figure out what to do in this game, and I didn't really feel anything pushing me to try harder to understand it. Skopje 83 is a roguelite FPS that feels a little bit similar to something like Deathloop, maybe. The cel-shaded art looks pretty good to me, but the game itself felt kind of unpolished and awkward. Maybe I'm just not attacking it from the right angle, but the game just didn't click with me. Hell Survivors is a pretty standard Survivors-like with manual shooting and attacking. Honestly, I've played so many of these games now, and this one just didn't stand out to me. But maybe it's going to be your next favorite game. Yars Rising is the third game in the Yar series that started back in 1982 with Yars Revenge on the Atari. For some reason that wasn't quite clear to me, Yars Revenge and its direct sequel, Yars Return, both have an apostrophe in their titles, but Yars Rising does not. Does that mean that there are many Yars ready to rise? Honestly, I don't care. And in my opinion, this demo was terribly balanced. It had way too much bland dialogue, too many characters, and it never felt fun in any way. It's a Metroidvania, but the exploration, movement, and combat all felt neutered or underdeveloped. Honestly, this demo was a chore for me to complete, but I did complete it, and there's a playthrough on our second channel if you want to see and, maybe fight me about it. Zero Protocol, it might be an immersive sim. Honestly, I had no idea what was going on in this game. I had to pass. The Legend of Korra is another game that I just struggled to comprehend. It's a word-based puzzle game, and I usually connect really well with those, but this one just didn't click for me. Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop is an adventure game that sees you servicing and using different kinds of machines. I get the idea here. It might be like a little similar to like Linkito, but to be honest, I felt too stupid to really enjoy this one. It's just beyond me. But I think if you're a tinkerer, you might dig this one. Tradesman Deal to Dealer is another game that I felt just too stupid to enjoy. I didn't understand anything about this game, and I was terribly confused the entire time. No clue what was being done here. This was so confusing. Metal Slug Tactics is a pretty standard tactics-style game set in the Metal Slug universe. Maybe it's just me, but I couldn't get into this game. I found the tutorial to be laborious, and the game just didn't pull me in. Mother Hub is the last game in this category. It's an FPS game with some horror sci-fi type vibes. I feel like I've seen people on Twitter refer to this as kind of being inspired by or similar to Doom 3, which I love Doom 3. But personally, I wasn't crazy about the presentation or feel of this game. But I'm also not really like an avid FPS player, so maybe this is going to be great for someone. I'm seeing some people really dig this demo, but I wasn't one of those people. Next up in the I like it, but maybe it needs some work category, we've got Mourn, which is an old school inspired FPS game that plays pretty well, but also doesn't really feel like it has a unique identity. Personally, I want to see these mechanics applied to a more ambitious or unique project. Reality Rash is a 3D beat-em-up with a really interesting premise. It kind of reminds me of Quantum Break or something like that, but the gameplay feels undercooked and the presentation is a little, rough around the edges. I think that this game could shape up to be something really cool, but it just needs a little more time to cook, in my opinion. Super Farming Boy, I didn't really get to play enough to understand this game because it kept freezing on me. But it looks sick. I would like to try this game and have it work. Undead Onslaught is a decent Vampire Survivors type game that I had fun with, but I feel that it needs a little more balancing, and it definitely needs more sound effects. There was basically no feedback for things like taking damage, which I noticed that with a lot of games on this, batch of demos, not giving appropriate auditory feedback for different things happening on screen, and the player, being me, just kind of not catching the cues. And I don't know, a very common thing I saw in a lot of these demos. I won't mention it every time I encountered it, but it happened a lot. Spare Devil is a first-person bowling-inspired shooter-type game that takes influence from the wacky bowling alley animations from years past. I was a big bowling enthusiast as a child. I still love bowling. Our local bowling alley still has 30-year-old animations that they play on the screens when you're bowling. I love this aesthetic. I think it's super fun. It's a great idea for a game. Unfortunately, I could not figure out how to play this game, and there is no tutorial or instructions available anywhere online from what I could find. If someone has some insights here, please let me know, but this was terribly confusing, although a really sweet idea. Megaloot seemed cool, but some of its mechanics were just a mystery to me. I don't think every game needs a full tutorial, but a manual or something to refer to should be standard for almost all games, in my opinion. Shlemo or Shlemo, I don't know. It's a side-scrolling action game that looks to me like it's taking heavy inspiration from Hotline Miami. Unfortunately, I found the game's controls to be pretty awkward. The whole thing feels like it could use a little more attention to detail. For instance, this tutorial text pops up to tell me to shoot into a vent. And it's a cool mechanic where if you shoot a bullet into a vent, it'll ricochet and, land in the next room when the vent lets out. However, the little text box popping up alerting me to this mechanic is also covering the vent. And where you shoot in the vent is going to dictate where the bullet winds up. So you got to know, like, where's your angle? Where exactly are you, entering the vent? And I couldn't see it. That kind of thing was so fucking frustrating. I think there's a lot of cool ideas and creativity here, but it probably needs a fresh set of eyes to address some of its shortcomings and maybe things that could be improved. The Ghost and the Phoenix is a roguelite vertical shoot 'em up that I think has a pretty good core, but the presentation, level design, and enemy variety, I think they all need a lot of work. This just feels a little bit first draft to me. Shotgun Recovery starts off with an absolutely wild intro, but after about 2 minutes, I was completely stuck and had no idea what to do. After looking up a, other players' playthrough, I actually did know what to do, but I just couldn't pull it off. It's a skill issue, okay? I mean, I get that, it's on me, but precision platforming in an FPS game is something that I've never enjoyed or excelled at, and I don't love that it's kind of like the first thing you do when you get control of the character, and when the game really kicks off. I don't know. I'm gonna revisit this in the future. Five Gods of Kung Fu started off very promising for me. I loved the whole visual presentation, the sound design is good, and the writing is charming. However, I couldn't get past the first combat tutorial. I have no idea what this is asking me to do. It looks like it's saying press, hold, but I can't be sure. Sometimes a tiger would roar, making me think that I was successfully completing the move, but nothing would change. I found a lot of games have tutorials like this where I just don't seem to understand what it is the game is asking me to do. I get that it's stylized and trying to look a certain way, but sometimes just having a little text box or something explaining what's going on would go a long way, because this sort of, I don't know what to call this. It's not diegetic. I don't know. It's just a certain type of menu that is stylized so heavily that it begins to obscure the message. For me, at least. Maybe you didn't have a problem and you love this game and it's your favorite game ever. For me, I am just baffled. But the game still looks pretty damn good. Sea of Radiation is a roguelite where you play as a fish swimming around a body of water that's all irradiated. You eat people and other fish to level up, and you see how long you can survive. Honestly, the game does feel a little bit unpolished to me, but the core gameplay is fun and simple, and I think a lot of people, including me, could find themselves, hooked on this one. Hooked, like, a fish. Megacopter is a helicopter combat game where you fly around and attack enemies. There is some awesome stuff on display here. There's a lot of character and charm. There's pixel art cutscenes that are wild, really fun character designs. Little details like the foliage blowing in the wind when you move around are great. But with all that said, the game does feel just a little underwhelming at points. I can't fully articulate why, but the art and presentation, it feels uneven to me. Certain things are super polished and have a ton of, just character and detail, and other things feel a little, like they got a little bit less love, Great stuff going on, just not evenly distributed throughout the game, in my opinion. I'll keep saying that. That said, this is just a demo, and the full game is out, and it's getting really good reviews. The story presented in the demo is definitely building up to something totally over the top, and I feel like I'm bound to appreciate the full game, even if it's not going to be a 10 out of 10 experience for me. Gunrun is a survivors-like game with a clean and simple presentation. It's not the best of these games that I've played, but it feels pretty great, control-wise. Personally, I think this game could do a little bit more to strengthen its own identity, given the overcrowded state of the genre right now. Fightin Words is a game that I couldn't get to launch. I asked the dev about it, but I never heard back. The game does look pretty cool though, maybe one day I can play it. Bloodless is a unique feeling action game where your attacks are largely parry-based, as your character has a resentment toward drawing blood that you know is integral to the story of the game. Now, my only complaint here is that the demo became a little bit repetitive, and then I hit a bug that I couldn't get past. So I decided to put it down and wait and see how the game might develop more over time. But there is a really solid foundation here. I think the full game is going to be pretty cool. Now moving into the I liked it territory, where I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it, and I don't really have anything negative to say. It just didn't, bring me to ecstasy. Daymare Town. First up, it's a hand-drawn point-and-click adventure that I think has a really strong sense of atmosphere. It's super cryptic and creepy. This one is all about unraveling a nightmare, and it seems like a pretty promising old-school adventure-type game with a really solid presentation. Believe it or not, Lone Fungus 2 is a sequel to 2023's Lone Fungus. At its core, it's a pretty standard Metroidvania, but the combat, controls, sound, graphics, they all come together to make a pretty compelling experience. I feel like I could spend a lot of time with this one. Chromacell is a horizontal shoot-'em-up that will eventually offer 10 levels. The demo was a lot of fun for me, although I feel like the sound effects were a bit lacking. Still, the demo provided a moderate challenge that showed off a ton of different patterns and enemy types. I think that this will turn out to be a pretty solid shooter. Beef Cat Ultra is a Game Boy-influenced auto shooter that has a really solid presentation and a great soundtrack. The Steam page describes its handmade stages as tough, and that's definitely true, at least in my experience. I loved the look and feel of this one, but ultimately, it was way too hard for me. I think that if I put in enough time and focus on the nuances of the gameplay, I could do better, but for now, I gotta put it down and play something easier. But if you're up for a challenge, this one seems pretty cool, and I do think I will eventually pick it up and just kind of dedicate a few months to it. Tidy Cauldron is a puzzle game where you arrange shapes to fit into a 5x5 grid. It's very simple, but I had a lot of fun with it. Metal Suits is a side-scrolling platformer where you wear various suits that give you different abilities. The game just feels solid to me. It's got a very consistent presentation, and I think it's a lot of fun. The story isn't really doing anything for me, but I also don't really play this type of game for the story. It reminded me a little bit of Beautiful Joe for some reason. I'm not sure if that was an influence, but the vibe is kind of similar to me. Moving on to our final category of I loved it. We got The Operator. It's somewhat similar to something like Papers, Please. You're an operator at the FDI, which is, basically the FBI, and agents need your help to move their cases along. And you use your deduction skills and a small set of tools to find information that helps them, move the cases along. I'm assuming that small set of tools will expand as the game goes on. However, there's more than meets the eye here. While the demo is very brief, it sets up a very intriguing mystery that I am super excited to dive into. The game has a very distinct style with strong, humorous writing that I think a lot of people are going to appreciate. You should definitely play this demo if you can. Pillory is an RPG with a really interesting art style. In the game's world, death doesn't exist, so in battle, you instead aim to demoralize your opponent to the point that they no longer want to continue fighting. Combat is turn-based, and each turn you're given 2 random options for moves. You can re-roll either of them, but re-rolling too much will negatively impact your mood. Whichever choice you don't pick will carry over to your next turn. The strategy here is a really fun twist on the traditional RPG mechanics, and I think that the presentation, stories, and characters will ensure that this game finds a devoted audience. If you ever enjoyed Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, the pod racing game for the N64, you will likely enjoy Deathgrip, not Death Grips. This demo builds on the foundation laid by that pod racer game, but adds things like boost, repair abilities, tilting, and combat. In my opinion, the enemy AI and sound design could use a bit of tweaking, but this demo is very promising and I had a blast with it. There are tons of options and ways to customize your racer, and the controls in combat are super intuitive. I'm usually not a huge fan of racing games, but this is one of those arcade-style racers that just immediately clicked with me. Blade Chimera is a 2D Metroidvania-influenced side-scroller with some unique mechanics. You are accompanied by a demon who takes the form of an ethereal sword that can be used in many different ways. While your main attack is a gun that seems to aim itself automatically, you can also throw the sword at an enemy to attack, or down into the ground to form a protective barrier. Throw the sword at a wall while jumping to instantly create a platform. The sword can also be used to restore old objects wherever there is a time distortion. This mechanic, again, it reminds me of Quantum Break. This sword is also used to cross gaps and perform a bunch of other moves. I had a few times where the gun was locked onto something other than what I was trying to shoot at, but hopefully that can be ironed out by the time the full game launches, because everything else in this demo is top-notch. You get right into the action, and everything just looks and feels great, in my opinion. Fumes is a single-player game with a focus on vehicular combat. I've never been good at games like this, and I wasn't even really very good at Fumes when I played the demo, but I still had so much fun with this one. The game has a really strong sense of style, it controls great, and I love that it's a single-player game. You gotta give this one a spin. RP7 is a roguelite slot manager. Your character here automatically advances across these 7 slots. You can select up to 3 slots to spin at a time, and as long as you're not standing on a slot, you can spin it as many times as you want. Sometimes you'll get sent to different slots on either end of the row, and the sort of frantic slot management that occurs reminds me a bit of something like Yoshi's Cookie. Also, I love the look of this game. It reminds me of old Famicom box art. I'll definitely be picking this one up when it launches. Dungeon Clawler is a roguelite dungeon crawler built around a claw machine mechanic. It's sort of an auto-battler. You engage in turn-based combat, and you have an inventory made up of weapons, shields, and various items. Every turn, you get 2 passes on the claw machine that will decide the actions you're going to take. The game is still in development and could definitely use some polish, especially in the sound design, but I feel like the team is really onto something here. There are also mini-games based on stuff like Pachinko, and I don't know, this one seems really fun, creative, and unique. Give it a shot. Death Machine is a pretty interesting Metroidvania-type game that has you exploring a giant mechanical citadel called the Death Machine. Your inventory, it's kind of like roguelite based. You collect different cards that alter your stats and attacks for that run, and you go out looking for skulls that you bring back to your Skull Horde. It's kind of like an evil version of Donkey Kong's Banana Horde, I imagine. The skulls can be traded with a demon who will give you new cards for your journey. The visuals here remind me of a mix between Blasphemous and games like Velfaris or Slain, and the music is kind of like in a dungeon synth style, which I really enjoyed. I really love the overall presentation here, and the navigation is a lot of fun with the dash and a grappling hook. For me, this feels like a fresh take on a very well-tread genre. Utopia Must Fall is one of my favorite demos from this batch. It's another roguelite shooter, but it has a presentation inspired by old vector-based arcade games. For some reason, I couldn't get this game to record properly, so I'm just showing some trailer footage, but it's an absolute blast, and I would love to play it on a full-sized arcade cabinet, ideally with some kind of dial or maybe even a trackball for controls. Still, I played it using my mouse, and the game worked great. This one is a lot of fun. Red Snow is another one of the top-ranking standout demos I played in this batch. The game is hilarious, at least to me, and it's clearly not afraid to take risks and follow through on big, over-the-top ideas for the sake of fun. It's a downhill snow racing game that mixes together a bunch of different elements from various games in that genre, and then adds combat to it all. The game is so much fun, and there is so much variety here in this demo. In my opinion, maybe the game could use a little polish, but the core of the game and its overall identity are so fucking cool. This demo rules. Rogue Sky is a sort of 2D dogfighter roguelite. You engage in aerial combat against waves of enemies, collecting different perks as you level up. You activate your thrusters to go up, and then release them to go into a sort of free fall. I found the controls to be super intuitive, and I was really impressed with the combat. I'm usually really bad at any games that involve me flying any sort of vehicle and, shooting stuff, but I was able to get the hang of this one pretty quickly, and I immediately felt that addictive pull that all good roguelites have. I don't know if this makes any sense, but those toys from way back in the day where you'd have like 2 buttons on like a little tank of water, and you'd kind of just press the buttons to shoot air and make the stuff go up, and maybe you had to do like a ball into a basket or hook things on a loop. The game kind of controls like that, if that makes any sense. And I don't know, I just think this one's awesome. Echo Stasis is somewhere between a text parser adventure game and a sort of roguelite exploration game. It's hard to explain, but once I was in it, it felt super intuitive. You're essentially going into a dreamscape of a person held in stasis, but you can only stay in that space for so long. With each trip you take, you learn a bit more about that world and discover shortcuts that will allow you to dive deeper into it. The premise established in this demo feels limitless, and I'm so excited to know that this has been fleshed out into a full game that is currently available. The Crimson Diamond is a game that took me back to my PC gaming roots. It's a text parser adventure game with an EGA look. This is a super old school kind of thing, but it runs so smoothly and it has great music with really charming pixel art. You play as Nancy, a woman on her first trip to a big city. She's investigating a diamond that a local fisherman found inside of a fish. She's staying the night at the Crimson Lodge, and as luck would have it, she finds herself in over her head. I don't want to say too much about this one because a lot of the fun here is unraveling the mystery, but I would highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of adventure games. Another adventure game here, we have Devil's Hideout. It's a classic point-and-click style game that again evokes an earlier era of PC gaming. You're investigating an abandoned hospital after learning that your recently deceased sister might not actually be dead. The puzzle solving in this demo was super satisfying for me, and the overall presentation was super tight. I'm definitely going to be picking this one up as soon as it launches. If it hasn't launched already, I don't know. Kill Knight takes the basic combat mechanics from games like Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal and applies them to an isometric twin-stick shooter. You get hit with an increasingly intense onslaught of enemies and you just cut loose. It's a lot of fun to play, and while I found the demo to be pretty difficult, it's clearly the type of game that will reward players who really lock into the flow of its combat. Tormenture is an Atari-inspired horror and exploration game. In this game, you're playing a game called Tormenture for a system called the Limbo 2800, which is basically a twisted, evil version of Adventure for the Atari 2600. You're gonna go look around, solve little puzzles, uncover Easter eggs, you take notes, all while sitting in a dark and spooky bedroom. There's obviously more than meets the eye here, but as far as adventure-style games go, this one is pretty solid. The sound and characters are a lot of fun, and the controls are super smooth. I feel like I could easily get lost in this game. Avoid is a unique runner-type game where you use the shoulder buttons to rotate the world around you. I didn't quite get the hang of it, but the game is so much fun that I didn't mind repeatedly trying and failing. I'm really looking forward to eventually spending more time with this one. Pipistrello, or Pipistrello? I don't know, and the Cursed Yo-Yo is a really neat action game that feels like it was directly inspired by Star Tropics. You have a special yo-yo that you use to attack enemies and grab items. When it hits an angled wall, it'll continue traveling along an altered path. This is the basis for a lot of the puzzles in the demo. It's a really tight-feeling game with a lot of polish. I think that this one will definitely find a following. Glyphica feels tailor-made for me. It's a tower defense survivors type game where you type to attack enemies that are surrounding you. The game plays just like you think it would. You have to look around at the words in play, prioritize them, and then attempt to type them out. It's a simple but effective concept that I think the game just nails perfectly. If you've ever enjoyed typing, give this game a shot. I actually had only one note for this game, and it was going to be to request a dark mode. But once I actually checked the options, I realized they already had one. I love this demo. I am so stoked on this game. Face Miner is a resource management idle type game about mining faces from images you receive in these data packs. You work for a large information company, and it seems like there is a lot more going on than meets the eye. That's the third time I've used that phrase in this video. This game feels so right to me. It has an immersive vibe, and the soundtrack and presentation are just spot on. And the resource management hits just the right level of difficulty for me. I'll admit, this game probably isn't going to connect with a huge mainstream audience, but I think that the people who give it a try are likely going to get sucked right into it. I really like this one. It's just cool. And that was it. That's 63 games that are either coming out soon or have a demo available. A few of these demos were timed, limited demos for the next fest, but more and more I've noticed that games are allowing their demos to be available after next fest, which I really appreciate. And I don't know, that's a bunch of games. Did I miss any? I know there's a few big ones that people really enjoyed that I didn't cover here because I wanted to go for some of the more, obscure games. I'm a cool, hipster kind of guy. I gotta play the most obscure stuff, you understand. And, it's a blessing and a curse. But let me know what I missed. I'm only gonna play so many games, but if I can, I will play all of the games, at least for a few minutes. All right. I wanted to get this one out sooner, but I didn't. It's a little quick, a little sloppy, but I had fun with it. Hopefully you had fun checking out a ton of new games. Hopefully you learned something. And of course, check out Hidden Machine for more videos. We got more big slabs of content like this where we cover dozens and dozens of games, but also videos where we go into one game and talk about it for, anywhere from like 2 to 8 hours. So check it out. Hidden Machine will never die. Thank you. Peace.